whole notion that if you're not on the extreme side of the net zero gang, then you're nowhere on the environment is dead wrong, because there is a healthy and achievable middle ground. And what I find refreshing too is a lot of the real experts, people with a lot of letters after their name in various scientific, physics and chemistry and all those disciplines, the Michael Schellenbergs in the US, for example, the Steve Koonens. Steve Koonin was an advisor to Barack Obama on environmental issues. Michael Schellenberg worked for the International Panel on Climate Change for the longest time. These are people that are saying, you know what, I've looked at, they've looked at the data, they've looked at this and said, we believe the goals can be achieved, but not in the extreme manner that will make life very miserable for a lot of people that is being promoted. So these are guys that were experts and people that really, were promoting this whole extreme agenda. Now they've backed off and said, it's not doable, it's not practical. And those are just a couple of examples. There's an awful lot of people that are realizing there's a middle ground. We can do the right thing for the environment, but still keep a decent standard of living and help the poorer countries around the world who, they depend on more low-cost fossil fuel energy used intelligently. And the other thing is Canada is very, very good at that. Our technology is top-notch around the world in terms of reducing emissions in the production of oil and gas and so on. And of course, the whole question of gas, liquid natural gas, replacing coal, one of the dirtier fuels in places like India, China, and now Europe. Germany's going back to coal because they don't want to be so dependent on Russia. Isn't that a crazy, silly outcome of their overly ambitious thrust toward green? So there's an awful lot of really learned voices out there that I think are speaking to this whole notion of the great pushback in a really intelligent way.
Yeah, Michael Schellenberger, you mentioned him. Of course, his book is Apocalypse Never. And he came from that world of the International Panel on Climate Change. He's a big fan of nuclear as well, saying, look, nuclear has been unfairly tarred and feathered by these activist environmentalists, but it's actually a very, very clean and safer fuel than a lot of other fuels. So hoping that sparks the discussion again in Canada on nuclear, right?
Absolutely. And of course, again, technology advances all the time. And a lot of these people that we're noting believe that there's Bjorn Lomborg is another good example, a Swedish expert on these issues. And he believes that we as a humankind, technology will end up being the solution to a lot of this. And nuclear is a great example because you've got these small scale nuclear reactors now that have way higher safety. They're clean as can be, and they're a lot more flexible to use in these big humongous, we think of Chernobyl, we think of 3 Mile Island, we think of these big humongous installations. And so technology has moved ahead, and yet nuclear still has a bad name with the green crowd. Germany, again, we mentioned Germany because they're so dependent on Russia, and it's just been a horrible thing to empower Putin's attack on Ukraine. Germany actually was getting rid of their nukes. They had perfectly functional, clean nuclear power, supplying a lot of their electricity and whatnot, and they were decommissioning them. So there are lots of different solutions, and nuclear is a very good example that I think our green colleagues need to get up the curve on a little bit, because it's not the demon they present it as.
You mentioned, obviously, the impact on most people, because I think this is an important point about how corrosive inflation is, and I'm drawing on your skills as an economist. Inflation impacts on jobs, on quality of life, and it didn't seem to be a concern of some of the ruling elites for a long period of time. So can you explain why it's so corrosive to standard of living for most people?
Well, it's a hidden tax is what it is, and it's very insidious because it hits everything we buy. Necessities, even things that aren't necessities, but we might like to have. And when I heard Justin Trudeau prior to the election, the 2021 election, he said, you'll have to excuse me, but I don't think about monetary policy. That gave me a chill, because I thought, frankly, what an ignorant statement to make. That means I don't care about inflation and its impact on average people. And that was just an incredibly tone-deaf, foolish thing to say, because everybody in any position of authority should be very concerned about monetary policy, because it is in large part what drives inflation. So right now we're seeing high inflation. We're seeing taxation layered on top of that, not simply in the energy area, but of course, when you have high taxes on energy, which we had long before the carbon tax, as you know, provincial and federal governments have levied serious excise taxes
We're just
on
going to
energy.
take another break, Catherine.